you'll see this idea all over the place. It is one of the most widespread ideas about justifying differences in power between character options in an RPG, which is that if a character is more complicated, more complex, it should be more powerful as a reward. Now, there are a few problems with this. Number one, characters in RPGs just don't get that complex. Like, unless your RPG is very complex as a baseline, their most complex and least complex characters are not that different. If your game is relatively simple as a baseline, like before you get into character options, the actual core rules of the game are not that much, not that substantial, like in 5th edition, then your lowest level your easiest characters are going to be your marshals, who don't really get any options. They are very, very simple. But even the most complex characters in 5th edition are not that complicated. Then you get into a more advanced game like Lancer, and the rules themselves are a little bit more elevated, a little more complicated, more intricate. There's a lot more going on mechanically. So your highest and your lowest are moved up, but they're still relatively close to each other. You still have kind of the same basic number of decision points to make at any given time. So that's number one, is that the complexity doesn't vary that much, and so rewarding an increase in complexity is always, pretty much always, going to be a big reward for a small price. And so that is not a good idea. Secondly, most of the time, additional complexity in a character comes in the form of additional options. That is, you don't just basic attack every turn. You cast spells. So you have this repertoire of spells. Or, like in Lancer, if you want to lean into tech attacks, you want to play a goblin where you're just doing tech attack, you've got a whole list of special abilities, and you got to choose which ones you use each turn. And that is a more complicated way to play the game. But it is like the added complexity is because you have more options, which means it is because you are already more powerful. So you should not reward additional power or additional complexity with more power, because what you're doing there is rewarding more power with more power. And that is not a good idea either. But there is a time when rewarding a character design, class, whatever you want to call it, with additional power is actually justified, which is when the character is more difficult to play. Which means that we come to the difference between complexity and difficulty. Complexity is basically just like the amount of additional brain power it takes to play this character. Ideally, most characters in an RPG should take about the same amount of thought to operate, because that is it's maybe I'll do a video on why that is, but the core idea of this is that your game should be played in a particular way. So when you're designing a game and you have wildly different complexities of characters, it's pretty much impossible to design a game that is satisfying for both the high end and the low end. So you should want them to be pretty close. And I forgot where the beginning of this freaking thought started. So yeah, that's complexity is the number of decision points you're making in a given time. They should be relatively close. That's what it is. Difficulty is in how easy it is to get your character to do what it is that they're supposed to do. Difficulty can range quite a bit, more than complexity. I think it has a wider gap between the top end and the low end. You can build a character who's very reliable, where basically anything you do is going to be at least a little effective. You can build a character that requires several independent things to line up just right in order to achieve optimization. Difficulty is not, I have more resources, therefore I have more to track. Difficulty is more like, I can do this high impact ability, but it has a lower chance of success than a lower impact ability. that is assuming that you don't have access to the lower impact ability, the more reliable one, that's difficulty. If you only get to do your special thing if an ally is adjacent to the target, like sneak attack kind of thing, that's added difficulty. Where you require circumstances to be ideal in order for you to actually like get the most bang for your buck. Adventures in Rokugan actually does this with their Ritualist. The Ritualist gets additional favor to spend on their spells if they are in an environment or make offerings appropriate to the spells that they're using. So each spell has like a list of, here's some things that can give you free favor for this spell. And really to play a Ritualist, ideally, you have to fulfill those requirements. So that's difficulty. Difficulty different than complexity. I think rewarding difficulty is good because you're not going to get it as often. Having a very complex character means that for just a little bit more thought, you either like look up the right build or just like kind of look at it and see, oh, well, this option is clearly better than this option. Oh, difficulty or complexity. So rewarding difficulty of play is going to mean that the difficult character is going to get fewer like high points, but their high points are going to be much higher. Where they're going to get more low points. Maybe their low points are the same or maybe not quite as low. Whereas the lower difficulty character is going to have a lot more high points, but the high points just don't go as high because they're being more consistent. I think that is a much easier thing to balance as a game designer than complexity, where you have to like add in all these options and basically you have to, if you want to make it really, really complex, you have to flood the game with a bunch of trash that the player is then, have to sort through and figure out which ones actually are good, how they interact together. And in the age of the internet, that just doesn't even work because you just go online and look up the right build and like, oh, okay, that's how this stuff works together. I'll just do that. And you don't have to know if it's the most ideal thing, if it's the most optimal build, or if it's more effective, or if you could improve it by doing something else. You don't have to know any of that. You just get the effectiveness by looking up a build online. So complexity, I think, does not need to be rewarded. It is its own reward. Additional options is additional power. Additional versatility is additional power. And so rewarding someone who inherently has more of that already is a trap as a designer. And I am sweating profusely, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up a little bit early. Those are my thoughts on complexity versus difficulty and why one should be rewarded and the other one should not.